Hello, teachers, and welcome to our live stream coming to you from the British Council Teaching English Facebook page. And also a very, very, very big welcome to the teachers who are joining us on the British Council Courses for Teachers group. It's a delight to have with us today the fabulous Alan Maley. Hi, Alan, how are you?
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here.
And so, Alan, can you tell us a little bit about where you are and what you're currently doing?
Well, where I am at the moment is in a small village in Kent, and I'm looking out of my window at a tree-filled marsh, which is lovely.
Oh,
Lots of trees.
delightful.
Yeah. And yeah, it's a very small place near Canterbury and a very, very agreeable place to live. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, it's really, really wonderful to have you here. Today, we're talking about qualities of a teacher, kind of started by a poem that you wrote, which we have published on the Teaching English Facebook page, Qualities of a Teacher. And it's a beautiful poem filled with rich and fabulous adjectives to describe teachers. So, Alan, can you tell us how you came about? How did the poem come about?
Well, the interesting thing is that it wasn't written as a poem.
Ah.
It changed into a poem from other people's perception of it. In fact, it was just a list at the end of an article that I'd written for a journal, and as a kind of postscript, I'd put this list of things, and then people started referring to it as a poem. So okay, then it's a poem.
And then it became a poem.
And it's a poem. So I gave it a title, and that made it a proper poem. Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, thanks everybody who is joining us. If you have any, what are the adjectives that describe you as a teacher? And we'll just say some hellos. We have teachers joining us from the UAE. We have teachers joining us from Libya and from India. So all over the world, and maybe even some of the teachers that places that you have lived, because you've had a very international career. In what kinds of places have you lived in?
Well, in Asia, China, India, Malaysia, Singapore, and working in Vietnam, Thailand, Nepal. Yeah, so quite a lot of places out that way. And then in Europe, apart from England, France, Germany, Italy, Yugoslavia, as it was.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so lots of different places. Yeah.
Wow. And we're joined by Marcel from Côte d'Ivoire and from Yujan from Nepal and Algie from Myanmar. So welcome, everybody. We're talking about teacher qualities. So, Alan, how did you find inspiration for some of the words in your poem? Like there's some words that it begins playful without being frivolous, energetic without being frenetic. There's a plethora of wonderful adjectives. How did you come up with those words?
Well, I don't know. I expect they occurred to me as being appropriate. I mean, what I was trying to do, obviously, is to give, as it were, two ends of a cline of a spectrum. So, the teacher has to kind of situate themselves somewhere on the line between the two extremes. Yeah, I think you mentioned one of the difficult words was prurient. Did you say?
Yes, that was
Yeah.
there was a couple of words in the poem that I have to say I'm not entirely sure what they mean. So
Okay.
one of
All
them
right.
was
So, yeah.
prurient.
Well, prurient. Yes. I mean, obviously you want to be interested in your students and show interest. I mean, a genuine interest in what they do and what their lives are like. But prurient means a rather taking an unhealthy interest in that. So you begin to become nosy,
Mm.
and you're perceived as being a little bit, not quite okay. So taking a genuine interest And I have a little anecdote of a friend of mine in Hungary was telling a story about, the teacher on a Monday morning, what did you do at the weekend? The usual kind of stuff. And one of the students said, well, I swam across Lake Balaton. And the teacher kind of said, oh, yes, good. And moved on to the next person. And if you know where Lake Balaton is and how wide it is, I mean, it's just an amazing thing. And instead of reacting with real interest, they just passed on to the next, okay, and you, and that, and you, and, they're not really listening to what the kids are saying.
It's almost
So I
like,
think that's the important thing, showing that kind of an interest. Yeah.
yeah. So that was like the genuine interest with a balance between genuine interest in the student without it going too far.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, you're not prying into their private lives, I mean, but you are relating to whatever it is they bring, and maybe probing a little bit to find out a bit more. Oh, that's interesting. Tell me a bit more about that. Yeah.
And all the language that comes out from that story.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
We've got a comment from a teacher, Amira, who's saying, as a teacher, I am patient, interactive, a developer, and inspiring.
Ah, well, I'm glad to hear it. Congratulations.
I like that
Yeah.
idea. I'm a developer, of
Yes. I
in
wonder if she means, or he means, a developer of themselves or a developer of other people.
that's a good question, Amira. If you're still there, can you explain a bit more what you mean about you're a developer? That would be interesting to hear. So there was another line in your poem, Alan.
Mhm.
Eloquent without being garrulous.
Right. Yes. Well, I mean, we understand what eloquence means, I take it. It means, of course, being able to express yourself in an easy and clear manner. But there is always a tendency among teachers to talk too much. And if you become garrulous, that is, you just talk and talk and talk, it's all hot air the whole time, then you become rather boring and tiresome. So, there's a difference. I think eloquence means being measured as well as being a clear communicator. And you know when to stop talking, when to listen. I think listening is such an important part of the whole thing. If you're not listening properly, you can't react properly. Yeah.
And so that's quite a fine line between, being eloquent, but not also, again. And so like you were saying at the beginning, the continuum of characteristics. How does a teacher know where that line?
Well, there aren't any fixed rules for that, I'm afraid. You have to make your own judgment about it. But usually, I mean, if you're reading your class, when you're in contact with them, you know what's happening at the other end. So you can judge. I mean, if you're starting to turn people off, it is fairly clear fairly quickly.
And
You pick up those clues, and then you think, well, perhaps I'm going on a bit. I'm rabbiting on about myself, or I'm talking too much. So time for me to, change tack a bit.
And that's, I think, for me, a strong teacher quality is around noticing, noticing the students in the classroom, reading the faces, feeling the energy, and making decisions at that moment of, am I talking too much, or is this interesting? How do I change it?
Yeah, I think I think I'd said this in the original talk at some point, that it's it's knowing, it's knowing when to stop and when to listen, when to notice, and then thinking on your feet. What do you do? What do you do with the feedback you're getting? And I made the comparison with clowning training, for example, which many people may have found a bit strange, because people think of a clown, they think of a red nose and all the rest of it. That's not necessarily what a clown looks like, a theater clown. They may be dressed up like that, But the important thing that a clown does is to read what's happening before doing anything. So everything they do is based on a reaction to what is happening. If you want to be a good clown, you mustn't have a plan.
Ah, yes, there's been a lot of talk over the years of, sort of moving away from the plan, moving away from the structure, and bringing out all of the emergent language.
Yeah.
Alan, we've got a reply from Amira about developing teacher,
Yes.
who says, developer, facilitate the development of students.
Okay, good.
Which is
Well done.
fantastic.
Yeah. No, and I think it's one of the great rewards, actually, if you're teaching students over a period of time, to see how they change.
Exactly.
And and I'm thinking now of for example, MA groups that I've taught in the East Asia, and looking at them 2 years later, for example, and seeing where they've gone, where have they got to, and what have they done. Some of them have written books, some of them have written articles, some of them have become head of department, or and you think, my goodness, that was worth doing. Yeah.
Definitely. Amazing. We've got lots of comments coming in. We've got one here. I'll just bring it up onto the screen. This one is from Sadaf, who, connecting to the story about swimming across the lake, I guess students really like to get more time to share their own stories.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. And of course, yeah, let me personalize it a bit. I wrote an article once, which was just called "A Room Full of Human Beings," and that was the basis for the course. That it was what the students brought about, and they're all interesting. People say, "Oh, I'm not interesting," but everyone is interesting, and everyone has stories to tell, because stories are what we are. We are
Exactly.
made up of stories. Humankind is a storytelling species. What they do, they tell stories all the time. So
We
why not
do.
use this? Yeah, in the classroom.
Absolutely. Like I'm learning a new language, and the thing that I find I need to do most in the new language is tell stories.
Right.
Talk about what happened to me last week, or listen to stories from other people's day or week or experiences. So
Yeah.
thanks, Adaf, for that. We've got a comment from the courses group, say from Rabia, who says, when I read this poem, I also feel like I was playing hopscotch and jump from one box to another. There's a range of qualities, and finding the right balance is really tricky.
It is. I agree.
Yeah, I
As
agree.
I said, that there are no kind of rules about this, because for one reason is that every group that you teach, it will be different. The chemistry will be different in some way. Some groups are more kind of outgoing, others are more introspective, some are more difficult, some are easier to teach. And the makeup of the group will determine to some extent where you put yourself on this line
Absolutely.
between the two extremes. Yeah.
And you've worked with teachers and students from all over the world for many, 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 many years. From all of these lovely adjectives that describe teachers, like, have you noticed any differences between primary or secondary or younger or older teachers, or newer teachers and more experienced teachers?
I think newer teachers, are obviously finding their way. And so they may find that in some cases they've misread the class or the group that they're with, and therefore they've gone too far in one direction or not far enough. As I think, if you are still in teaching after, let's say, 10 years, you're probably you've got a fairly good nose for what we'll work with this group. Okay, and if it doesn't work, well, it's okay, we'll go back a bit and we'll do a bit something a bit different.
Mm.
I can't really comment sensibly on the primary and secondary and tertiary kind of differences. But obviously, I mean, the older you get, technically speaking, anyway, or you would hope that students are more mature, but not necessarily, actually. So, you know, if you've got a group of the troisième âge, you know, third age students, they're in their 70s or 60s or something, you know, there's obviously a big difference what you can talk about with them, because they bring so much of their own experience, even more than other groups.
Imagine how many stories that, yes, exactly,
Yeah,
a lifetime of stories.
that's why they're so rewarding to teach. At the other end, I mean, the primary, the younger students, and I'm not a teacher of younger students. I don't have the experience of that I would I could comment really. But what I have noticed is that they bring qualities of imagination, which the other groups have had knocked out of them.
Mm.
You know, there's this change that takes place between primary and secondary, which is deplorable, really, because all the good things that, you know, the imagination, the interest, the curiosity, all of these things get damped down.
Mm.
Secondary systems on the whole, you know, because the exam comes in and you've
Yeah.
got to follow the syllabus, you've got to follow the textbook, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And in the end, you know, they kind of switch off, a lot of them, and I don't blame them, actually.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of a lot of teachers watching who are sharing their comments. A lot of the words that they're using to describe their teacher qualities are inspiring, patient, and organized.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can only agree. Patience, certainly, very, very important.
Yeah.
You know, you don't catch the fish with the first time you throw, you know, the bait. You have to wait. You know? I mean, teaching is a bit like fishing in that you wait until they bite, and then you haul them in. You know?
I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I mean, that is true, and inspiring, yes, of course. And what was the last thing? The last
Organized.
word you mentioned?
Organized.
Hello. Oh
Uh-oh.
dear.
Oh dear. Don't worry, Alan. No, it's okay. You're still there.
Uh,
Can you hear me? Alan might have dropped out for just a minute, but he'll be back very shortly with his internet. We'll just check if he's there in a moment. So everybody, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. We are live on the British Council Courses for Teachers group and also on our Teaching English Facebook page, and we're talking about qualities of a teacher. So here is one, here's a comment from Frederica. Creativity is penalized at the highest levels, which is a real shame, and that's what Alan was talking about. So hopefully you might be able to bring back some more creativity into the classroom. And we have a big shout out to Reni from Indonesia and Faria from Algeria, and Nicodemus is joining us from Sri Lanka. So teachers watching, what are your characteristics of qualities of a teacher? I'm just going to read some comments from the courses group. So Andy says, lovely fishing metaphor. And Rabia is talking about conformity as children grow. And Alan is back.
yeah, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. I was just summarizing some of our conversations and reading out some of the comments from there. So, Alan, over your long career as a teacher, we were talking about this before we went live, about, you know, back in the day, we used to be able to read a lot, and what changes do you notice with teachers, that what teachers experience as the years have gone by?
I think one of the things that we all have problems with now is the sheer quantity of information that comes at us from all angles and all directions. So we all suffer from what I call info glut, just too much information, and we don't know, nobody can know everything, and nobody can access everything, and that sometimes worries people. And I would, if you're thinking of your long-term development, I think it's good if you can somehow identify sources or people, even more important, who can actually help you. They have access to particular kinds of information which you need. You know where to go and get it. I'm just thinking about, there are lots of people actually in our profession who are very, very good at being an expert in a particular aspect. I'm thinking of people like Russell Stannard, for example. Russell Stannard, who shares his expertise in technology and with teachers very freely. So if you have something, he's your man. He's one of the places where I would go if I had a technical question to ask, or if I wanted to do a bit of self-development in that area. Nikki Hockley is another person of the same kind, who also freely shares a lot of her information. There are these people. There was a wonderful book, which I have here, actually. Happens. Called The Tipping Point.
Oh, yes.
The Tipping Point, by a man called Malcolm Gladwell, Mr. Know-all, actually. And he describes how change happens. And he says that you need three kinds of people for change to happen. The first kind are what he calls connectors. And these are people who are very good at having a network, putting people together that they think might be interesting for each other, that kind of thing. The second kind of people are what he calls mavens, Mavens. And mavens are people who know a lot about something. So like these people that I was just mentioning, like Russell Stannard, for example. And those are the kind of people that the connectors put in touch with other people. And thirdly, you need people he calls salesmen, which is perhaps a little bit derogatory, but what he means are people who will get out and about and talk about these things and write about them. People like Jeremy Harmer, for example, or Scott Thornbury, people who are respected and people listen to them. So with these three kinds of people, you can actually get quite a long way, even in this morass of information that we are all being showered with the whole time.
And also in people's schools, there's a lot of people within the school community who
Absolutely,
have, who are also those characteristics of sharing
yeah.
ideas or sort of promoting discussion.
Yeah,
It goes.
sorry. When I was giving the first talk, I think anyway, I talked a fair amount about the desirability of finding someone that you can talk to and share ideas with. And I mean, obviously not just one person, there are a lot of people out there who are very willing to help and who can kind of screen out a lot of the rubbish that there is, because the internet is full of garbage. No, I mean, it is.
We
And
need
you
to be able
must,
to filter.
if you can't somehow filter it, you're really in trouble. There's just too much of everything. There are too many websites, there are too many Facebooks, there are too many this, too many that, too many blogs. you know, And some of
Yeah.
them are very, very useful, and some of them are not.
Mm.
So
And being
it's
able to filter
really
them.
important to develop through other people, a kind of awareness of, now this one, I know I can rely on this one,
Exactly.
She knows what she's talking about.
Yeah.
I'll go to her if yeah. So that kind of, yeah.
Well, I think that connects very well to a comment that Giuseppe's made on the courses group that says, I think one of the teachers' quality is honesty and continuous learning. So quite a few teachers are talking about being well read and, sort of keeping up to date with things. And like you were saying, connecting with somebody who's got sort of good information.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I can't agree more. I mean, I'd made a note earlier on about, the importance of reading. Reading is not a fashionable thing these days, but I think it's coming back into fashion to some extent.
I think it is.
And reading, what Krashen uses the word, what is the word now? Well, reading widely and reading compelling stuff, whether it's exactly within your speciality or not, in a way doesn't matter.
Mm.
That read widely. Don't just read within the narrow confines of applied linguistics or language teaching. Read everything.
Read stories.
Yeah. He said the word I was looking for was promiscuous. He says, be a promiscuous reader, read all sorts.
Read everything.
Read everything you can that looks interesting, and so that's one thing about reading. The other thing, which is connected to it, and if English is not your first language, and even if it is actually, you need to look after it. And the reason I say that is because in classes, you are almost all the time being exposed to either a very restricted form of English, the one in the course book, or you are being exposed to defective English, which is the English that the students are using, necessarily defective, because if they were perfect, they wouldn't be in your class. So, but that means that the English teacher, whose language is not English, first language, but most particularly, they need to really be aware of the need to go on developing their own English. It's the same in any language that you're learning. I'm using English because we're talking about teaching English, but I think it's so important. And I mean, even if English is your first language, it's very easy to, plateau.
Mm.
And I want
reading.
people to get off the plateau in their own language. That's the important thing. And one of the ways
Reading widely.
and one of the ways I do that is by writing creatively, by writing poetry or by writing stories or by writing memoirs or, or even letters. Some people still write letters.
I still write postcards.
But, in other words, trying to keep the brain well-oiled, well-lubricated.
There's a comment here from NASA who's sort of reiterating that, but from almost a perspective from the students. A good teacher captivates interests, engages with knowledge that we're talking about, reading and skills, connects emotionally, and encourages students to explore and learn new things. And that exploring within the students.
Yeah. I just an anecdote very quickly. I taught a presentation skills course in the University of Singapore. These were undergraduate students. And one of the things that we did was obviously that they made presentations, and they made presentations about their own lives. And these were fantastically interesting. I mean, yeah. One student I still remember, this is 20 years ago now. I mean, she did a wonderful presentation on wayang kulit, the Javanese puppets, shadow puppets. Wonderful. And everybody had something that was really interesting. So we do need And that, of course, stimulates their interest in other people, but also they realize that they are actually interesting, you know. And it's pretty important to think that you are interesting, you know, because you are.
Yeah. Well, I think there's lots of comments coming in from the teachers talking about Teresita is talking about engaging learners in literature and sharing reflections and stories. You know, really brings the class alive. But I love that point that you just made about, you know, we're all interesting.
Absolutely, yeah.
So on that note, time has flown by and the half an hour has gone. And so teachers watching, thank you so much for joining Alan and I on that lovely summary. We are all interesting. It's such a good...
Don't forget.
Don't forget. Alan, thank you so much for joining us. And teachers on the courses group, thank you for joining us. Teachers on the Facebook page, thank you for joining us. And thanks, Naomi, for moderating. And we will see all of you very soon in a few days for another Facebook Live with Graham Hall on publishing research. So, Alan, thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you again soon.
So bye-bye to everybody, and thank you for coming.